Fort Myers, Florida is the fastest growing city in the fastest growing state in North America, and it is just one example of a pattern playing out across the entire state. Florida passed New York in 2020 to become the third most populated state in America, and it has not slowed down since, adding residents at a pace few states have matched. With recent growth still heavily driven by people moving in from elsewhere into a $1.4 trillion economy with more than 20 Fortune 500 companies. Every number points in the same direction, toward a state that is growing faster, attracting more people and generating more wealth than almost anywhere else in the country. But look past those numbers and something else comes into focus. 46% of Florida households were living paycheck to paycheck in 2022. The state also ranks 45th out of 50 in wages, and the hotel workers, the theme park employees, the agricultural laborers keeping the whole machine running are increasingly living in pay-by-the-week motels while working full-time for some of the most profitable corporations on earth. So how has one of America's fastest growing states become one of the hardest places in the country to actually make a living? The answer to the question starts with Florida's oldest habit, mistaking a boom for a permanent foundation. The 1920s brought a land rush built on drained swamps and speculative fever that collapsed before many of the developments being sold were ever built. The 1950s surge, driven by the spread of air conditioning and the post-war baby boom, made Florida feel like the future of American living until it peaked and faded. The 1970s oil shortages hit the state hard, exposing how dependent Florida was on cheap energy and easy mobility. And in 2008, South Florida became one of the epicenters of the housing crash that drove the Great Recession, a foreclosure crisis driven by speculative lending that wiped out the savings and home equity of working and middle-class families in ways that took an entire decade to begin recovering from, and in many cases never fully did. Florida was the fastest growing state in the country for the first time since 1957, when this current cycle began. And the last time it held that title, the boom ended. Between 2010 and 2022, a period described almost universally as a golden era of Florida growth, the number of households living in poverty in the state increased by 8%, meaning the growth was producing wealth while simultaneously expanding the population of people it was leaving behind. The reason that keeps happening is the same every time, and it has nothing to do with luck. Texas and Arizona attracted major tech, corporate, and advanced manufacturing investment, with companies like Tesla, Apple, and SpaceX either relocating operations or building new facilities there. While other fast-growing Sun Belt states built deeper, high-wage industry clusters designed to compound over decades. Florida's equivalent growth looks like new chain restaurants, strip malls, tourism infrastructure, luxury condominiums, and real estate transactions. Agriculture, tourism, and real estate have maintained their grip on the state's economic core regardless of how many companies have relocated there or how many startup accelerators have opened across Miami and Tampa. 65% of Florida's 20 most common occupations paid below $20 an hour in 2022, and the state's median household income sits more than $5,000 below the national average. The number that captures the structural problem most precisely is this. Walt Disney World alone generated more than $40 billion in statewide economic impact in 2022, a reminder of how much Florida's growth model still depends on tourism. That is an extraordinary amount of economic weight for a single tourism company headquartered outside the state. Citadel, Goldman Sachs, Spotify, BlackRock, and SoftBank have all opened operations in Miami in recent years, and those are developments that signal Florida's financial sector is maturing, but they are operating inside an economy where nearly 2/3 of the most common jobs cannot support a family at current Florida prices, and the people filling those jobs are arriving into a state whose demographic makeup has been quietly shifting for 60 years in ways that make the affordability problem considerably harder to solve than any single company relocation can fix. Starting in the 1960s, Florida developers made a deliberate choice to market the state as the retirement destination for aging Americans, flooding national publications with images of warm weather, affordable housing, and planned communities designed around leisure. The strategy worked so completely that it became Florida's defining economic identity for generations, and the consequences of that choice are now impossible to ignore. 21.2% of Florida residents are now 65 or older, one of the highest shares of any state in the country. The ratio of working-age adults to retirees has already fallen to 2.5 to 1 and is projected to reach 2 to 1 by 2030, creating permanent shortages in construction, healthcare, and public safety that the labor market cannot resolve on its own. Between 2024 and 2025, deaths exceeded births in Florida by about 1,300 people, meaning every person added to the state's population from that point forward had to arrive from somewhere else. Without migration, Florida's natural population change has already turned negative. The retirement capital of America is being sustained entirely by people moving into it. And those people are arriving into an economy built on service sector and manual labor employment that cannot support the cost of living their arrival keeps driving upward. Essential services across the state are already feeling this. Construction is short of workers at a moment when Florida desperately needs to build more housing. Healthcare facilities are struggling to staff adequately in a state with one of the oldest populations in the country. The workers Florida needs to function and the retirees Florida built itself around are now competing for the same housing stock, and the workers are losing badly. A large share of Florida's recent growth has come from people arriving with outside money, including movers from expensive housing markets. Many of these arrivals are coming from markets where median home prices approach or exceed $1 million, and they are purchasing Florida properties above asking price using equity from those homes which, for Floridians who never fully recovered from the 2008 recession, feels less like normal competition and more like displacement. Single-family home prices went from $136,000 in 2010 to nearly $400,000 today. The average statewide rental price sits at $2,128 per month. Florida ranked first in the nation for rent increases in both 2022 and 2023. New arrivals in Miami earn an average of 59% more than the city's existing median income, meaning the market is being set by people whose financial circumstances have almost nothing in common with those of long-term residents. The transformation is visible at the level of individual towns. Freeport in Walton County had fewer than 2,000 residents in 2010 and has more than 12,000 today. Panama City Beach has grown 34% in that same period. Ocala, Wildwood, Davenport, and Lakeland are barely recognizable from what they were 2 decades ago. The state has grown by more than 35% since the early 2000s, and its roads, schools, utilities, and social services are nowhere near keeping up. With school buildings averaging 31 years old and private school enrollment surging as families with resources abandon a public system visibly buckling under growth it was never built to absorb. Florida cities account for 7 of the 10 worst daily commutes in the entire country, and the congestion in Miami and Orlando alone costs drivers an extra $1,000 every year in wasted time and fuel, a hidden tax paid almost entirely by the people who can least afford it. The average income of Florida's top 1% has been estimated at 39.5 times the average income of the bottom 99%. Miami, Florida's largest urbanized area and the state's most credible path to genuine economic diversification through finance, international trade, and high-skilled industries, is losing population for the first time in more than 50 years as the middle and working-class residents it depends on are priced out entirely, pushed into the suburbs or out of the metro completely. The state's most important economic engine is hollowing out, and it is doing so on top of a physical foundation that most people moving to Florida have never fully reckoned with. Florida is the most hurricane-prone state in the country, caught between the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, with an average elevation of just 100 feet above sea level. The state was built on drained wetlands and sits on a highly porous limestone base, meaning rainwater dissolves the bedrock from below and creates sinkholes that open without warning. Thousands of sinkhole claims and incidents have been reported across Florida over time, especially in the western part of the state known as Sinkhole Alley, 41% of Florida's land mass is classified as flood-prone, and between $1.1 and $1.9 trillion of the state's total property value sits inside flood impact zones. Sea levels along the coast are projected to rise 10 to 18 inches by 2050, threatening to push saltwater upward through that porous limestone and into the aquifer, supplying the state's drinking water, a source that millions of residents depend on daily. Southwest Florida is already experiencing serious water contamination from agricultural runoff and industrial discharge, affecting communities that have few alternatives. Inland cities including Orlando and Gainesville, which many assume are safely removed from coastal risk, face significant future flooding exposure as the water table rises and storm drainage systems reach their limits. The state faces repeated tropical storms, hurricanes, and severe weather losses, with billion-dollar disasters becoming a regular part of the risk. After each storm, the response has largely been to rebuild in the same places on the same land and send the bill to whoever is still willing to insure it, and as it turns out, fewer and fewer companies are willing to. Florida has seen dozens of insurers fail, stop writing new policies, or pull back from the market in recent years. The Citizens Property Insurance Corporation, the state-created insurer of last resort, grew from 421,000 policies in 2019 to 1.4 million in 2023. One recent estimate put Florida's average home insurance cost at $8,292 in 2025, an 18% increase in a single year, and roughly 1 in 5 Florida homeowners now carries no insurance at all, because coverage is either unaffordable or simply unavailable, leaving them financially exposed in the most storm-prone state in the country with no buffer against disasters that arrive on a predictable annual schedule. Net domestic migration into Florida has fallen sharply from its post-pandemic peak, a sign that the state's growth machine is slowing, dropping the state from 1st to 8th place for domestic population gain in 3 years. Many Floridians leaving the state are heading to other Sunbelt states such as Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, states that not long ago were losing people to Florida rather than receiving them. The housing market that defined the state's recent boom is cooling. The population growth that made Florida feel inevitable is slowing, and a growing number of the 23 million people still living there are asking a question they never expected to ask: whether Florida is still worth it. Florida succeeded at building one of the most dramatic growth machines in modern American history, generating wealth, attracting capital, and producing population numbers that made other states take notice. And that success is exactly what makes this story worth understanding. The people who built that machine, the ones cleaning the hotels, harvesting the crops, staffing the hospitals, living in pay-by-the-week motels while working full-time at Fortune 500 companies, were never the intended beneficiaries of what it produced. Florida built a growth machine that worked beautifully for capital, tourism, and real estate, then failed the workers expected to keep it running. The gap between what the growth numbers promise and what the state delivers was not an accident. It was built into the model from the beginning.